Good morning. Welcome to the Central European University Sociology and Social Anthropology Graduate Conference titled Extraction, Multiple Frontiers of Power and Resistance. I am Kaan Kubilay Ashar, a first-year PhD student at the Sociology and Social Anthropology Department here at CU, and one of the organizers of this conference in my cohort with Jofi Bachsadi, Umay Jan, Ray Leili Lin, and Visvesh Mohan. Our professors, organizers Claudio Soprazetti and Johanna Markula, and our department staff Anna Maria Pris and Ildiko Chikan. We also thank to the CU Events Fund for funding this event. And it's a great pleasure to welcome our keynote speakers and presenters, on-site and online audience this morning, and to explore together the question of extraction in its multiplicity, both as a concept and a reality. We are honored to host our two keynote speakers, Professor Sandro Mezzadra and Professor Kaushik Sundarajan, and exciting presentations from the participants who brought the study themes of extraction, power, resistance. We hope that this conference will be one entry through which we will have further and fruitful debates on the contemporary capitalism. Our first keynote speaker today is Professor Sandro Mezzadra. He's a professor of political theory at the University of Bologna and adjunct fellow at the Institute for Culture and Society of the Western Sydney University. His recent work on globalization, labor, and borders have been highly influential in migration studies, cultural studies, political theory, sociology, and anthropology. He's the author with Brett Neeson of Border as Method, or the Multiplication of the Labor, in 2013, and of The Politics of Operations, Excavating Contemporary Capitalism in 2019. His critique of contemporary capitalism engages with multiple disciplines, and his interventions reach beyond academia, and I'm honored to be his past student. So I'm very happy to introduce Professor Sandro Mezzadra to present our first keynote today. And welcome again, and enjoy the conference.
So good morning, everyone. Let me start by saying that I'm really happy to be with you today, these 2 days. I have to thank a couple of friends for inviting me, Claudio Sopranzetti and Prem Kumar Rajaram. I have to warmly thank Anna Maria Price for her work. And above all, I have to thank the graduate students who suggested to invite me as a keynote speaker in this conference. I remember that I was invited to Budapest at the Central European University for a graduate conference 9 years ago in June 2013. And it was a really important moment of exchange and encounter for me. I have no doubt that today and tomorrow will be the same. So extraction. I look at extraction from the angle of, let's say, a critical theory of contemporary capitalism. This means that I ask which is the position of extraction within the fabric of contemporary capitalism. It is not the first time that I am asked to talk about extraction and capitalism over the last 12 months, and I take it as a kind of important symptom of a growing interest in the topic of extraction, extractive capitalism. But let me say that I am accustomed to think in the conjuncture. An idea that I take from the work of Stuart Hall on the one hand and Louis Althusser on the other hand, as well as from Machiavelli, that was so important for Althusser, as you may know, to define his notion of conjuncture. So also my analysis of extractive capitalism is a conjunctural analysis, which takes stock of the concrete determinations that make up the present situation, while keeping in mind, of course, the medium and long-term trends and dynamics that merge into the present. So thinking in the conjuncture, thinking extraction in the conjuncture. But defining the current conjuncture is not an easy task. While the COVID pandemic has been defined by Adam Tooze a global crisis like no other, over the last couple of years, we have been confronted with the quote and unquote cascading crisis, or what has been called by officers of the European Union a polycrisis. Climate crisis, migration and refugee crisis, race crisis in the US, energy crisis are just a few instances of the proliferation of crises that the pandemic, in a way, brought together, enhancing their visibility. So this is the reason why 1 year ago, I started to work with my co-author and friend, Brett Nilsson, on the development of extractive capitalism in the pandemic conjuncture, focusing on logistics and in particular on the further entrenchment of the operations of extractive digital platforms in social and economic life, as well as on the literal extraction of so-called transition minerals like cobalt, nickel, copper, and rare earth, which are needed to spur processes of decarbonization and digitalization that should shape the prospect of a post-pandemic world. We have been mapping processes of further expansion of capital's frontier in landscapes of literal and expanded extraction. We have paid attention to the governmental notion of essential workers and to the relevance of circulation and social reproduction in guiding, in steering processes of valorization and accumulation of capital. So we were working hard, we were writing. But then on February 24th, the conjuncture changed abruptly. And the war came to dominate our lives. So without dismissing the relevance of the findings with respect to what I called the pandemic conjuncture, what is happening in and around Ukraine raises crucial questions for any theory of extraction and extractive capitalism today. I will just mention a couple of them without going into the details, but I really hope we will have time to discuss them during our conference. So first of all, we have to ask which kind of capitalism prevails today in Russia, and which is the relation between this specific capitalist formation and Putin's war of aggression, widely analyzed through the concept of imperialism. It seems clear to me that capitalism in Russia is primarily extractive capitalism, predicated on the export of commodities like oil, gas, grain, and secondarily, a political capitalism, meaning that political power controls the rent from those commodities, distributing it among a small elite, the so-called oligarchs, and using a limited part of it to finance policies capable to reproduce consensus. So an extractive and political capitalism. This is a specific instantiation of extractive capitalism, where development is completely dominated by rent, with no dynamism, and above all, with no space for social struggles on its content, pace, and direction. In an extreme way, Russia embodies a model of extractive capitalism that we may also find elsewhere. And this model of extractive capitalism, I repeat, raises important questions regarding the meaning of development. But let me point to another question raised by the current war. In my own work, I have always stressed the global dimension of extractive capitalism, and we will have time to discuss about the meaning of this adjective global. But what I mean is that the notion of extractive capitalism becomes interesting if it is not limited to countries and regions with a strong extractive sector. And, as we will soon see, if extraction is not merely understood in literal terms. And I will explain in a moment what I mean by that. So from this angle, from the angle of the global dimension of extractive capitalism, what is at stake in the current war is neither more nor less than the shape of the future world order and disorder. And if we follow scholars of the world system theory, like Immanuel Wallerstein and Giovanni Arrighi, what defines the current conjuncture is the hegemonic crisis of the US. We have to ask whether wars are going to proliferate in the next future, and again, which is the relation between extractive capitalism and war. So after this rather long but necessary introductory note, allow me to come to the main point of my lecture, which is, as I just foreshadowed, to introduce and discuss an expanded notion of extraction. And I think discussing such an expanded notion of extraction can be helpful at the very beginning of our conference. This is a notion that I forged in my collaborative work with Veronica Gago on so-called neo-extractivism in Latin America, and in a more systematic way with Brett Nielsen while writing The Politics of Operations, the book that has been mentioned and that came out in 2019. We have been working on extractivism and extraction to grasp a fundamental break in the history of modern capitalism. Extraction points to a global logic of current capitalist accumulation and valorization, which differs decisively from industrial capitalism. And I think there is indeed a need to stress the difference between what we mean by extractive capitalism and the logic, the rationality of industrial capitalism. Although I should emphatically add that extractivism today coexists with booming industrial activities in many parts of the world, so that the relation between extraction and industrial production remains an open and important issue. In this sense, let me say that while I stress the extractive dimensions of contemporary capitalism, I remain a bit wary regarding the use of the notion of extractivist capitalism as a kind of emphatic attempt to define capitalism as a whole. And this is because I think that the notion of extractivist capitalism bears the risk to reduce contemporary capitalism as a whole to extraction and to obscure other relevant dimensions of its operations. So to keep in mind other conceptual nomenclatures, from logistical capitalism to financialization, to make just two examples, may be helpful to better understand even the extractive dimensions of contemporary capitalism, and above all, to shed light on their implications on what Marx called living labor, which remains at the methodological as well as at the political level my absolute priority. So an expanded notion of extraction. There is anyway a need to start with the literal extraction, with mining, and even more clearly today with extensive agriculture. We all know that histories of extraction in the modern age are strictly linked to the history of colonialism, from the silver mines of Potosi in today's Bolivia to the rubber plantations in Congo, in the Putumayo territories of the Amazon and in Southeast Asia. This is a point we have to keep in mind, since the continuities of colonial logics, although in ways that are far from straightforward, are a key point at stake in struggles surrounding the expansion of the colonial frontier today in many parts of the world. Achille Mbembe has recently argued that even the Middle Passage, the Atlantic slave trade, must be understood as an extractive endeavor. A similar point was made many, many years ago in 1972 by Walter Rodney, the great scholar and activist from Guyana, in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, where, I quote, the extraction of slave labor from all areas of Africa to all destinations over the many centuries that the slave trade existed is linked to the predominance of purely extractive economic activities attached to foreign trade to genealogically explain the persistent underdevelopment of the continent. And indeed, the continuity of extractive activities as a privileged form of integration of formerly colonized countries and regions into the capitalist world market has been often critically emphasized after World War II in the debates surrounding underdevelopment, dependency, and uneven exchange. And you can see here again the nexus between extraction and development that I was mentioning before with respect to Russia. So while those debates remain important theoretical archives, the situation has become much more complicated today. resource imperialism remains a relevant concept to investigate the spatiality, the spatial coordinates of extraction. But the intertwining of operative scales that Martin Arboleda so effectively describes in his recent Planetary Mind accounts for a much messier geography of global capitalism today in the domain of literal extraction. Capital's constitutive outside, Arboleda writes, can no longer be cast in terms of a straightforward north-south or west-non-west divide. Rather, cores and peripheries need to be understood as immanent to the capitalist production of space, end of quote. But what is even more important is that the frontiers of extraction expanded in an amazing way over the last decades, both geographically and materially. Just think of the relevance of already mentioned minerals such as lithium, coltan, and rare earths, which are essential for today's miniaturized electronic and account for the materiality, for the dirty materiality of such an ethereal notion as the cloud. So literal extraction, as I was saying, is always, one can say, even conceptually linked to violence. The history of colonialism provides us with even too many instances of that. And that violence reproduces itself today, as we know, for instance, from the histories of indigenous resistance to dispossession of land and disruption of social forms of life in many parts of the world. One of the obvious ways to theoretically make sense of this predicament is through a rereading of the chapters of Marx's Capital, Volume 1, that deal with the so-called primitive accumulation. Marx's analysis of the so-called primitive accumulation, extraction, plays indeed an outstanding role. As you know, these chapters have been widely tested over the last decades, and I have modestly contributed to this trend. There is a growing consensus among scholars and activists that we should read those chapters against the grain, which means that we should not refer Marx's analysis exclusively to the historical origin of capitalism, but rather take it as symptomatic of a set of processes and procedures that repeat themselves across the whole history of capitalism itself. I think this is an important theoretical move, which emphasizes the relevance of dispossession for processes of capitalist valorization and accumulation, violence and dispossession. Nevertheless, I have two theoretical reservations with respect to the recent use of the notion of primitive accumulation that I would like to share and discuss with you. The first reservation has to do with the tendency to reduce dispossession to mere plunder, which means to unilaterally stress its destructive aspect. On the contrary, I agree with Jason Moore, who stresses in his work on the Capitalocene that we should grasp the productive character of appropriation, both historically and in the present. Saying productive character does not imply a positive evaluation, of course. It simply refers to the assemblages of world market, technological innovation, and accumulation that at the same time enable and are enabled by dispossession and appropriation. The second reservation has to do with the unilateral emphasis right on dispossession, which is often opposed to exploitation, and I am using, of course, the terms of David Harvey. My impression that, again, I will be happy to discuss with you, is that such opposition has often led to the emptying out of the notion of exploitation. On the contrary, I am convinced that one of the main challenges we are confronted with today is indeed to rethink the relation between dispossession and exploitation, going beyond any binary opposition. Let me now ask a simple but important question. How can we define extraction? Working on the relation between extraction and capitalism, it is clear that Marx's definition of mining in terms of rent in Capital, Volume 3, is still quite compelling. Marx emphasizes the key role of property and the ensuing right of the proprietors to exploit the earth's surface, the bowels of the earth, he writes, the air, and thereby the maintenance and development of life. And Marx also stigmatizes, I quote, the palpable and complete passivity displayed by the owners, whose activity consists simply in exploiting advances in social development, particularly in the case of mines, toward which he does not contribute and in which he and the industrial capitalism might sound, and in which he risks nothing, unlike the industrial capitalist. So the opposition between the owner of the mine as a passive rentier and the industrial capitalist as a productive entrepreneur may sound a bit odd today. Mining has become, over the last decades, a crucial field of experimentation for new technologies of prospecting and excavation, including digitalization and robotization of the whole economic process. But what matters here is that Marx defines mining in terms of a takeover from the outside. A takeover from the outside, a takeover of resources, but also of what he calls advances in social development. The critical literature on mining and extraction invites us to problematize this reference to the outside, since it is already constituted as appropriable through such activities as prospecting and logistical endeavors that prepare extraction. Nevertheless, the moment of takeover remains characteristic of extraction. And we should let resonate the words of James Ferguson, who stresses in his Give a Man a Fish that the value derived from literal extraction is completely, I quote, out of proportion to the effort. In some sense, we recognize that the value was already there, stumbled upon, not created, but emerging fabulously, almost magically, as if from nowhere. End of quote. Call it the magic of rent, if you wish. So in order to move toward an expanded notion of extraction and toward the end of my talk, it is key to maintain that both natural resources and social cooperation, what Marx calls advances in social development, can be target of extraction. The expanded notion of extraction I have in mind emphasizes the role of social cooperation and of extractive operations of capital targeting social cooperation itself. Even research on literal extraction, as the book by Arboleda I quoted above, increasingly deals with the networks of social cooperation that enable, are tested, and even disrupted by extraction. More generally, an expanded notion of extraction is at least implicitly deployed in many works that underscore the extractive dimension of contemporary capitalism, from Saskia Sassen and Harten Negri, who focus on finance, to Mariana Mazzucato, who emphasizes the gap between value creation and value extraction in the innovation economy. I will try to introduce in the next 5 to 10 minutes the way in which Brett Nilsson and I use an expanded notion of extraction in our critical analysis of contemporary capitalism. And I will basically provide 3 examples. So the first example I would like to shortly discuss with you are digital platforms. Harking back to what I was saying at the beginning regarding the pandemic conjuncture regarding COVID, well, digital platforms are definitely among the winners of the pandemic. As I was saying before, speaking of the cloud, the operations of platforms are embedded in an environment predicated upon the expansion of the frontiers of literal extraction. In turn, there is a need to stress that digital platforms are widely described as extractive platforms in critical literature. What is extracted are primarily data. Just like oil, Nick Zrnicek, for instance, writes in his Platform Capitalism, data are a material to be extracted, refined, and used in a variety of ways. Technologies of data mining are crucial to the working of digital platforms. The extraction of data lies at the very heart of those operations. But what are data? We can ask. Okay, just like oil, Nick Zrnicek writes. But it is important to stress that data do not exist in nature, contrary to oil. They are rather produced by social interactions, by what I would call in a very neutral way, social cooperation. And it is, again, the takeover of social cooperation, the extraction of data that regard both the intimacy of the single and the totality of his or her social relations that lays the basis for the vertiginous accumulation of capital enabled by digital platforms. At the same time, the latter, digital platforms, employ and exploit labor. Just think of the riders working for food delivery platform, to make just an example that became particularly visible during the pandemic. And this exploitation combines with the dispossession of social cooperation through the extraction of data to build a kind of second source of value. I was speaking before of the need to go beyond any binary opposition between dispossession and exploitation. Looking at digital platform, you can see the intermingling between these two notions and related processes. A double source of value. A double source of value which can also be described in Marxian terms as an uncanny hybridization of absolute and relative surplus value, and that may be well characteristic of extractive capital, even beyond digital platforms. So a second example, and I will be very quick on that, is logistics, logistics in general, because digital platforms, in a way, are part of logistics. So I will not go into the blossoming field of critical logistical studies. I will just limit myself to say that also in logistics, let's say at large, we are confronted with a kind of double source of value. On the one hand, you have the vast, heterogeneous, and often rebellious world of logistical labor that is exploited in warehouses and ports, on trucks and ships. In many parts of the world, that labor was labeled essential during the pandemic, to remind us of the crucial role of logistics for contemporary capitals. But on the other hand, you have a peculiarly extractive moment in the operations of logistics, which becomes apparent when you think of the relation of inventory giants like Amazon or Walmart with the heterogeneous productive environments from which they literally extract value to processes of synchronization and coordination from outside. Again, the moment of takeover. So with a spectacular reversal with respect to the height of industrial capitalism, circulation seems to take over production and to command it. I will be very quick on the third and last example, which means finance. And this is also because the extractive dimension of the operations of finance is often discussed, as well as their in-time relation with violence. Brett and I have analyzed such extractive dimension of finance from the angle of labor, in a way challenging the widespread image of finance as a kind of self-referential domain in which money is exchanged with money. Again, we have been developing a point already made by Marx in the third volume of Capital, where he stresses that the distinctive feature of what he calls interest-bearing capital, what we can translate financial capital today, is the accumulation of claims or titles to future production. Marx asks himself and his readers what is characteristic of finance. And his answer is, it is the fact that financial capitalists accumulate claims or titles to future production. So you see here the strict connection between financial titles and future production, which means labor. So the emphasis, or this emphasis on the wealth to be produced in the future, implies that there will be subjects, debtors, and mortgages among them that will be compelled to work in a subordinated position in the future in order to make possible the financial valorization of capital. And in a way, you can say that the main source of value of financial capital is an abstract form of social cooperation, a cooperation that has yet to take place, but it is already constituted as a site of extraction, of takeover from the outside. So two short points to conclude. The first one has to do with the way in which I make sense of the spread of extractive operation within the fabric of contemporary capitalism. As you have seen, I stressed the financial, extractive dimension of the operations of contemporary capital. At the same time, I was saying at the beginning that I am a bit worried of such a notion as extractivist capitalism that seems to reduce the whole of capitalism to extraction. So in the politics of operations, Brett and I hark back to an important notion foreshadowed more than forged by Marx, that is the notion of Gesamtkapital, that we translate as aggregated capital, while it is usually translated as total capital. This is a notion that Marx introduces to make sense of the unity of capital, while at the same time grasping the movements of the parts, of the single capitals, of fractions of capital, as well as frictions and even clashes among them. I repeat, it is not a fully developed notion, and this opens up the space for, let's say, a creative or arbitrary interpretation and expansion of it. So to put it simply, my point is that aggregated capital, Gesamtkapital, cannot be reduced to extraction. But extractive operations play a kind of hegemonic role in its composition and working. So the notion of Gesamtkapital raises the question of the way in which capital is composed. You have industrial capital, you have commercial capital, you have any kind of capital. To put it quickly, my point is that in the age of industrial capitalism, industrial capital dominated the composition of aggregated capital. While today, the kind of operations and fractions of capital that dominate the composition of aggregated capital are extractive operations and fractions. Multiple problems arise here regarding the articulation of the different operations, the political dimensions of such articulation, and the ways in which the moments of command are embedded in wider configurations of capitalism. So, to really conclude, a couple of questions that maybe we can pick up for the discussion. The first question arises from what I was just saying about the composition of Gesamtkapital. Speaking of logistics, I have pointed to a situation in which circulation occupies a position of command over production. But how can we make sense of such a reversal of the classical relation between production and circulation? I think this is a very important point. And the risk that is implied by some theories of logistical capitalism is to forget the relevance of production. While the main point for me is to make sense of the way in which production and circulation are articulated with a dramatic difference with respect to the past. The second open question regards the political implications of this increasing relevance of extraction in the working of contemporary capitalism. I was very much emphasizing the relation between extraction and violence, which are the implications of this relation when extraction at large becomes prevailing. You know, one could say reading Marx's Capital, Volume 1, that exploitation was a dialectical concept. Extraction is surely not a dialectical concept. The third open question regards the notion of exploitation and its relation with dispossession under the conditions of extractive capitalism. I already talked about that. And then there is the fourth question, a question I didn't touch upon, but a question I hope will be at the center of our deliberations today and tomorrow. This question is resistance to extractive capitalism, struggles against or within and against extractive capitalism. I would have much to say about that, but I conclude now, and maybe there will be an occasion to ask back to this question in the next 2 days. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much. I think my question is about what you touched upon in the end about the political implications, and I'm particularly interested about the unionization question in the current context that we're dealing with. We are seeing unionization in the US happen in Amazon warehouses and, at the Starbucks employee level. But I was just wondering if you think that, we also need to rethink a new form of unionization, also leading through Arbolada's work on Planetary Mind, whether there's something about a supply chain unionization which is a possibility in this context, and what you think about the relationship to a new form of unionization, if at all that exists, because there are some sporadic examples in the US which are very interesting at this point, but we don't know where exactly it's going to lead. So I just wanted your opinion on that.
We collect a couple, we collect a few, no?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this keynote. One question I have, I suppose, is where you would say that this kind of extractive capitalism comes from. What is the sort of problem that it seems to answer? Is there a particular moment of crisis that produces these transformations in the kind of structure and operations of capitalism? I tend to think in a let's say in a kind of workers tradition that capitalist development, of course, is not a sort of neutral process of technical development, but rather responds to social struggles of one kind or another. I wonder how you might locate particular social struggles within the kinds of processes you're talking about. I wonder, is there a challenge in addressing this at a level of a certain level of abstraction where one might lose sight of some of those struggles, which tend to be quite situated, quite grounded in certain ways? And is there a risk of sort of losing sight of some of where some of this comes from, maybe?
Okay. I guess I wanted to go back to kind of Marx-inspired interpretation of the passive nature of extraction, and ask you a little bit to think about how we conceptualize that passivity now. What I mean is that it seems to me that in Marx, there's two elements that determine that passivity. One is this idea of taking over from the outside, which again, as you were saying, has been questioned quite heavily in understanding of how extraction operate now. And the second point, I think, in Marx of that passive definition is the idea of a lack of industriousness, right? The industrial capitalism was understood as this innovative force of industriousness, which I think created that kind of strange opposition between exploitation and extraction, right? Because on one side, there was labor being extracted, on the other one, there was this idea. So if both of those elements for Marx are under question for us, where do we locate the passiveness of extraction at a conceptual level? I guess that's the question.
Yes, Sandro, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about finance and sort of in this register. So there was something that is so fascinating for me methodologically about your presentation, especially if read alongside politics of operations, right? Whereby you present to us logistics as an exemplary site of extraction, but you have also, with Brett Nielsen, presented to us logistics as an operation of capital that exists alongside extraction, right? So I'm very interested in this duality where logistics is both an exemplary site of, but also another operation to capital in relation to extraction. And you do the same thing with finance, right? As an exemplary site of extraction, but also as an operation of capital that exists alongside extraction. And I wanted to add a third dimension to finance, which is Bob Meister's argument that finance is a conjunctural modality of value generation that arguably is not based in commodification, but in optionality, right? And so even as industrial production remains important, Meister's argument is that there is a progressive uncoupling of the valorization processes of finance through optionality from valorization through commodification. And this was Meister's argument with Moishe Postone, right, who said no. And so I'm wondering here for a couple of questions. First, how you think about finance, not merely as an operational modality of extraction, but as a driving force of contemporary capitalism. And the question that raises is, how do you think of data and logistics in relation to optionality and not just commodification? And the second question is, Marx has given us a template for thinking the relationship of commodification to living labor in the Grundrisse. But how do you think about the relationship of optionality to living labor? Like, what does finance do to that relationship?
We have the last question, and for the audience, online audience as well one.
Okay, I'm a little bit worried that this will be kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back with all of these questions from different fields, and I'm going into sort of yet another field. I want to start out by saying that you mentioned that sort of with this focus on extraction, we're in a way possibly reducing our understanding of capitalism, but I think one could also say that we're expanding it to say that there can be no capitalism without extraction. And that, of course, even in the Marxian sense, still places labor in there very centrally, because with Marx's notion of metabolism as the exchange between society and nature, and labor as achieving that metabolism, that would then sort of still be very much at the core. At the same time, I'm wondering whether we're currently not also seeing a shift from kind of the centrality of this role of extraction in its multiple facets to more of a crisis also of sinks in different senses, in the sense that we have a physical crisis of sinks for wastes and emissions that we sort of don't have enough space to get them back into nature. But at the same time, also in the financial sense, I mean, there's a lot of the global development is actually driven by, I would say, a crisis of capital sinks, right? The need to invest capital somewhere, and it's sort of not being very straightforward all of the time where these investments can go. And I'm wondering how kind of these two sides of the coin relate to one another.
Also, if I may, we have another question online.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I just got in. Yes, from if you could keep track of this. From Luisa Escobar, could you elaborate more on this idea about exploitation being dialectical and extraction not? Thank you.
Other questions? I will be happy. So let me start. Thank you so much for the question regarding unionization at Amazon in the US and other labor struggles, let's say in the field of logistics. I think these processes are crucially important. There is a US-American specificity to them, which is quite apparent if you note that the Biden administration has been backing them. I think in a kind of intelligent way, thinking back to the New Deal in the 1930s, where the unionization of a new industrial working class was the crucial basis of Roosevelt's New Deal. So this is a first point that we have to keep in mind, that we have to analyze in a very, cold way. But such forms of unionization and struggles are quite widespread today, also beyond the US. Particularly in the sector of logistics, in the last 10 years, we have been witnessing many important and often innovative struggles. You may be familiar with the notion of circulation struggles that has circulated a lot over the last years, and that is an interesting way to make sense of this proliferation of struggles in the logistics sectors in many parts of the world. I will say something very quickly on the region where I live, in Italy. In the last 10 years, there were wild and radical workers' struggles in the logistical warehouses, in the land port of Bologna, and in other cities in the region. 10 years of continuous struggles outside of the traditional unions. Grassroots unions have been organizing those struggles. There is a peculiarity to what happens in the logistical warehouses in the north of Italy in particular. And this peculiarity is that more than 90% of the workers are migrants. More than 90%. This is something you don't find at Amazon in the same region. There's a clear divide. But anyway, these mainly North African migrants have been protagonists of amazing struggles. What really strikes is the continuity of those struggles. And these are struggles that have also been, in a way, successful in terms of wages, in terms of conditions of labor, and so on. But at the same time, we have started to support those struggles in 2012, 2013. And our idea was, okay, we have come to understand that logistics is a crucial sector for contemporary capital today, maybe like the automotive industry in the 60s at Fiat in Turin. So struggles must be explosive. But they were not. They were not. There have been amazing worker struggles, but within specific borders, without any expansive dynamic, you know. So it's clear that I ask myself whether this idea of a double source of value, this may sound a bit abstract, does not help us to understand such a situation. You know. So there is another aspect of the processes of valorization of capital in logistics that is not directly addressed by labor struggles. And we have to continue to experiment with attempts to address in an antagonistic way also that moment. Where does extractive capitalism come from? I think we already provided at least part of the answer to this important question. I work with a collective of, let's say, young, quote unquote, young researchers. The name of the collective is Into the Black Box. You can check their website. They do amazing work on logistics in particular. And you may know that in management literature, they speak of a logistics revolution in the 1960s. And Into the Black Box has turned this phrase upside and speaks of a logistics counter-revolution, explaining that it was workers' power in the 40s factory that compelled capital to revolutionize the relation between circulation and production. But I think that methodologically, this operaist way to address your question works also outside of the West. If you look, for instance, at neo-extractivism in Latin America, by neo-extractivism, what is meant is a kind of deepening, to put it very, very quickly, too quickly, kind of deepening of the historical role of extraction in Latin America. Well, it is difficult to understand it without going back at the history of popular movements in the 1960s and 1970s that challenged the so-called developmental regime in many Latin American countries. And the development of guerrilla was part and parcel of those movements. And there are works, for instance, in Argentina, that show that it was the genocide dictatorship after 1976 that created the conditions, even the financial conditions, for the rise of neo-extractivism. And in a way, you know, the same is true for the question of supply chains. You know, the logistics revolution is important because it creates the conditions for the complete reorganization and stretching of supply chains across the globe after the crisis of the early 1970s. If you look at the main countries that were reshaped by this new geography of supply chains, you can also see this kind of dialectic between struggle and development. So it's a very important question, and I would like to expand more in a more detailed way on it. The passive nature of mining, you know, you are definitely right. I mean, Marx's point was to highlight the innovative and industrious nature of industrial capitalists. And he stages a kind of opposition with owners of mines who are simply parasites because they have a rent that comes to private property of the land. But at the same time, I think that we have to keep something from Marx's analysis of mines, which means this moment of takeover. If we talk about extraction, I mean, even conceptually, we need the moment of takeover. The moment of takeover is a takeover from the outside. And this raises a very important question for the critical theory of capitalism today, which means the question on the roles of the outside for the development of capitalism. And you may know that this is a question that is at the center of feminist debates, post-colonial debates, and so on. But it's difficult to keep this idea of the complete passivity of the owner of the mine. Today, the owners of mines are huge transnational corporations. There is a concentration in the sector that is amazing, you know, even geographically. Basically, you have Australia and Canada, you know. Although new corporations are emerging, for instance, in India, you know, so there is a kind of hierarchical organization of mining property. So huge transnational corporations that are quite innovative from the point of view of, you know, technology and the organization of labor. So mining has become a field of experimentation, and we have to keep this in mind. Talking about the green condition, the green transition. Well, today, the notion of green mining is very much widespread. And of course, you can think this is greenwashing. And in part, it is greenwashing, but it is not only greenwashing. So thank you very much, Kaushik, for your questions that allow me to better explain what I was saying very quickly about finance and logistics. You are perfectly right. There is a moment of extraction in the operations of finance and logistics, but finance and logistics exist and operate alongside extraction, more often than not enabling extraction. If you look at any extractive project, independently of the scale, you have first of all two problems. How do I finance the project, and which are the infrastructures that allow the project to work in an economically effective way? So this is a very important point. The question of optionality, you may remember that we had lively and wonderful discussions with Bob Meister in Chicago and with Boston too some years ago. And I think it is interesting to look at the way in which the notion of optionality works against the logic of commodification, according to Bob Meister. But to put it too quickly, I would say that we are confronted with a kind of intermingling between optionality and commodification. I wouldn't say that optionality is kind of substituting commodification. While at the same time, if I understand correctly what Bob means by optionality, I've read twice his book, but I'm not sure. Optionality is a logic that is in a way shaping the behaviors and the imagination of many workers today. And this is something we have to keep in mind. You were saying no capitalism without extraction. This is a point that I find quite interesting, although it should sound banal. You know, I find it very interesting because it allows me to say something that was implicit in my talk, but that I would like to make explicit now. One could say no civilization without extraction. In the history of human civilizations, extraction plays an outstanding role. And even from the point of view of mythology, I mean, you have a really rich archive with respect to extraction, not only in the European civilization. You know. So this is, again, something banal, that nevertheless raises questions for an attitude that is particularly widespread today in movements of resistance against extraction, in particular in Latin America. This kind of radical ecological turn within these movements that combines radical ecological theories and indigenous worldviews, and comes to the point to say no extraction at all. No extraction at all. Well, I think this is problematic. I think this is problematic. You know, I was emphasizing the question of the relation between extraction and development. I would like to talk about this question, not now because I don't want to take too much time, but we need to address this question. We need, I think, to imagine forms of development and growth that point toward a higher combination of freedom and equality, and nevertheless enable, you know, a growth that tackles poverty, for instance. So I think this is a question that remains largely unaddressed in critical studies of extraction, you know, and we should try to advance our understanding of the way in which development can be rethought and extraction can play a role in this rethinking of development. You know that the notion of development has been criticized over the last 30, 35 years. I'm not naive. I'm perfectly aware of that. Nevertheless, I say, taking stock of that criticism, not at all forgetting it, maybe there is a need to imagine again a form of development, maybe with a new name, you know, because development is, but something like that. Then there was the question regarding exploitation. Well, in a way, I have to frame it better. Marx's theory of exploitation is part of an understanding of the relation between capital and labor that is eventually a dialectical interpretation. What do I mean by that? You may know that Marx discusses what he calls the encounter between capital and labor in Capital Volume 1, Chapter 4. And the way in which he discusses this encounter has been critically tested by feminists, by post-colonial scholars, by global labor historians over the last decades. And why? Because Marx talks of the encounter between capital and labor from the angle of a specific form of regulation, which is, quote and unquote, free wage labor. And many people have said, okay, but this leaves, for instance, reproductive unpaid labor out. This leaves slavery out. This leaves other forms of forced labor out, and so on and so on. There is a very rich literature. But okay, let's stay with Marx. The origin of free wage labor is a contract, is a labor contract. If you go back to Capital Volume 1, Chapter 2, Marx describes the very juridical notion of contract, and he says that a contract is predicated upon the mutual recognition between the two partners. So this moment of mutual recognition is inscribed onto the labor contract, is inscribed onto the framework of Marx's analysis of exploitation. And it is not by accident that reformist socialism, since the end of the 19th century, tried to valorize this dialectical moment. Extraction, well, I don't see a dialectic of extraction. It's a bit difficult. Any other questions?
Take a break.
Thank you.
We'll start the end.